Do you mind if we jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I'm here with Saikat Chakrabarti, and I want to actually say you have quite a resume behind you. Ivy League graduate, founding engineer at Stripe, co-founder of the Justice Democrats, AOC's chief of staff. San Francisco voters, I imagine, are like kind of tired of resumes. I think that they really want to know stakes. So what I'd actually like to do with you now is I'd like to give you up to 5 minutes uninterrupted to tell us not just who you are, but why you believe this specific moment in 2026 is so critical for the voters in your district.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'll start with, I guess, who I am, right? I grew up in Texas. I grew up solidly middle class, going to public schools and, having a completely apolitical life. And my parents actually immigrated to this country back in the 1970s, and they came from India, and they grew up pretty poor there, right? Like my dad was a victim of partition in India, which was this terrible event where they split up the country along religious lines. And so my dad was a refugee when he was a 1 year old baby due to that. And he sort of grew up with his family of 12 in this one bedroom apartment, often not knowing where his next meal would come from. But he, came to his country because he got this lottery ticket, which was a visa to America, and that kind of always stuck with me, that story, because like I would go back to Calcutta and meet my dad's friends and family, and a lot of them work just as hard and just as capable, and they never got that opportunity. And so growing up, you know, it was really instilled in me how like A, you got to give back, but
Mm.
also B, um, just what America gave to us as like a family. Because my dad came here obviously because the American dream was your kids are going to do better than you, right? He came here to give me that life. And so I ended up coming out to San Francisco in 2009. I came here because I've honestly really always loved the city. Growing up in Texas, like San Francisco is kind of paradise for me. But it was also, as a sort of a tech geek, like, yeah, I loved this idea of the city that was like building the future. But at the same
Mm.
time, we have this real value of being like fair and just and equal. And then there's this melting pot where anybody can come from anywhere and we accept you. And it's this really beautiful thing. And so I worked in the tech industry when I first showed up. And, I was drawn to it because at that time it seemed like tech was going to be the answer to a lot of the big challenges of society. And this is like the era of Muhammad Yunus doing microfinance loans. And it was clear, I'd say, after a couple years of working here, that that's not what was happening. If you live in San Francisco, you see the inequality all around you. You see, people sleeping on the streets while you're walking to your startup job. So I quit. I quit because I knew I wasn't working on what I actually wanted to be working on. And it's like really cheesy to say this, but I actually wrote down a list of what I wanted to work on. And it was inequality, poverty, and climate change. And I wasn't political, as I mentioned, so I was looking at nonprofits and stuff like that. And then Bernie started running for office. And Bernie, I didn't know if he had the answers, but he was talking about those three things in a very compelling way, drawing these huge crowds. And so I was like, I got to work for that guy. I went and jumped on his campaign. And that was my radicalizing experience because it was like I got to use these skills I had to organize millions of people, millions of volunteers. And we had this chance where it really felt like, man, if we win this, we're going to get Medicare for all. We're going to actually fix the healthcare system, right? And we didn't quite get there, but that's what got me into realizing that politics can be this real lever for the kind of actual change that we need to make in our society. And that's why I ended up started in Justice Democrats afterwards. We're trying to do the Bernie thing, but for Congress. Initially we're going to recruit hundreds of people all around the country to take over Congress, do the Bernie program. It's basically Bernie plus the Green New Deal program. But yeah, long story short, you kind of went through like my history. I ended up, through Justice Democrats. I ended up actually also running AOC's first race because she was one of the people we recruited through Justice Democrats to run. And we never raised the money or got the movement going to win all the races. So we're like, we're gonna throw a Hail Mary. Let's just go see if we can win this one race, in New York.
Mm.
And so I moved to New York, ran her race, ended up being her chief of staff after she won. And why run this time? It's the same reason. Like ultimately, my fundamental belief is for decades now, life has been getting harder and harder for most people, right? The American dream is shattered. The reason my dad and my family came here, knowing that their kids are going to do better than them, that's not the case anymore. Kids today, young people today, they are going to do way worse than their parents. And that is at the core of why we keep seeing voters vote for anybody who's pitching bold, sweeping change. I'd say that's why Barack Obama got elected. And I think that's also why Donald Trump just got elected again, right? And if we can't actually create a country where people's lives get better through democracy, then people are going to keep voting for authoritarians. It's just the easier answer. And so that's what drives me is I think that's possible to do. I really think it's possible to build an economy that really works for everybody, that dramatically improves everybody's lives. It's the way to do it is a completely different way of going about things than we do right now. But that's what I want to make happen. And I think in this moment, after Trump won again, I mean, to be honest, I thought I was going to go back to like recruiting candidates and doing, something like the Justice Democrat stuff again. But I just got more and more frustrated by what I saw from our Democratic Party leadership in their response to Donald Trump, how they're acting in this moment of a real authoritarian coup going on. But also, uh, their lack of ability to really envision an actual future where people's lives really get better. That's something that I think has been a problem in the party for a long time. So I want to make that happen. I actually want to recruit people all around the country again. I want to work with a team to get this vision into reality. So I don't know if I feel like I went on longer than 5 minutes there,
No,
but
no, no. No, no. I think you're just about at 5 minutes, and thank you for coming so prepared. I really appreciate the thoroughness of your answer. I want to return to you mentioning how your sort of like tenure in politics, like before now even running as a candidate, is predated quite a bit. It feels almost like a political generation ago that the
yeah,
squad was elected the first time, and kind of recognizing that. I mean, you were literally a part of the human infrastructure that created the squad. You were in the room when the Green New Deal was like an infant as an idea, but now we are here in 2025. And I think that you can probably agree with me that like the squad's legislative record is modest.
yeah,
And they have become famous, and certainly they have been an agitating force. But in terms of what they can say that they drove to actually be passed, I would say that is modest. So if the specific like outsider playbook that you sort of helped stand up hasn't really resulted in significant legislation being passed the first time around, I want to know then, how have you revised your own strategy for your own run?
yeah. Well, I would push back slightly on the legislation piece. So here's a version of what I saw actually happen from a little bit of political courage. And this wasn't all the squad.
Mm.
So the full story around the Green New Deal is we were working on the ideas behind the Green New Deal for a while. It's at my think tank that I'm currently at now called New Consensus. We started that at the same time as Justice Democrats, and we had been trying to get some big ideas across into the political sphere. And one of those ideas was we need to actually talk about proactively building up our economy. A lot of that got turned into like industrial policy, but it's really more than industrial policy. And so the Green New Deal was kind of a distillation of a lot of these ideas. It was saying two things. One, we got to go way bigger on climate because back then all the plans on climate, even like Bernie's plan in 2016, they were just woefully inadequate. His 2016 plan was like 80% emissions reduction by 2050 through carbon taxes. And the other big thing we're saying is we actually need to treat climate change not as just a crisis, but as this huge opportunity to upgrade our economy, build a whole new clean economy that provides tons of high wage, high value jobs for all the people that have been left behind through this deindustrialization that's happened over the last several decades. Really rebuild the American dream. And the way we did that, so AOC on her first day in DC, she did this incredible thing. She did a sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office with the Sunrise Movement, which, she was very respectful about it. She was like, Speaker Pelosi, we're showing you that the people have your back if you want to go big on climate. But, imagine doing a sit-in in your boss's office on your first day at work, right? Like it took a little bit of some guts to do that, to
Yeah,
say the least. But
certainly.
that one act, it really changed everything because we started doing this inside outside organizing thing where Sunrise was showing up and doing sit-ins in other members of Congress's offices. They're showing up to the presidential town halls and telling everybody running for president, what is your response to a Green New Deal? On the meantime, I was on the inside calling up all the staffers in those congressional offices, being like, hey, sign on to Green New Deal. Calling up the members of or the people who are running for president we didn't actually want to get to endorse the Green New Deal, but I was saying, propose your own detailed plans. I was saying do a public bank to finance this investment. This is how you actually build out a new clean energy industry. This is how you build out a clean power grid, right? I was
Mhm.
giving them those ideas and actually pushing that stuff. And the result of that was every single person running for president responded with their own climate plan, including Joe Biden. He had to respond with Build Back Better. And Build
Mhm.
Back Better turned into the Inflation Reduction Act. And
Mhm.
that passed and created the largest investment in climate change in history. Now, here's a second thing that happened that no one ever talks about. The initial demand of the Green New Deal was for the Democrats to create a committee to come up with a plan to solve the climate crisis in 10 years.
Mhm.
We didn't really get that demand, but we did pressure the Democrats into creating a committee on climate that did a little bit of long-term planning. So they actually produced a lot of great policy ideas. And this was the reason why the IRA wasn't a shit show, because the Democrats took 2 years actually coming, doing this research, doing some planning, coming up with some ideas of what to do. When the Inflation Reduction Act happened, they had this pool of ideas to pull from to create a real plan. So
Mhm.
that is my approach. I actually think that's still the approach we need, because I think we're at a point where it's not going to be enough to just like do some reforms on our healthcare system. It's not going to be enough to
Mhm.
do some reforms on our current affordable housing system. We can't just like improve low income tax credits by a few percentage here points here, or like
Mhm.
add some more subsidies to the ACA. We have to do the structural changes. So that's what one member of Congress with a little bit of courage could accomplish on this idea of climate change and industrial policy, right? Now,
Mhm.
imagine if you had dozens or hundreds of people like that, right? Who aren't taking any
Mhm.
corporate money, aren't taking lobbyist money, who are willing to actually go all the way, push for these big ideas. I think we absolutely can like have a sea change in what the Democratic Party stands for, who it stands for, and actually get the stuff done. Like, there's no reason we can't. We just saw the Republican Party completely transform itself in 10 years through one guy, through this cult of personality. I don't want that. I don't
Mhm.
want to do a cult of personality, but we could have a team of people doing that. And I
Yeah.
think so yeah, I do measure it not in terms of like how many bills get passed. I'm going to measure success in terms of what are the outcomes in our economy that occur at the end of a new Democratic administration.
Yeah. I guess that I want to make sure I repeat to confirm. That way my audience is clear about your answer to my question. It sounds like that what you're saying is that when you think about entering the halls of Congress, that your version of successful advocacy and being a successful legislator, I'm sorry, looks pretty similar to the types of tactics that were used by the Justice Democrats when they in the squad when they were first put into office because of the ability to agitate leadership that's currently there and also would be leadership later. Am I correct about that?
With a twist, right? So because it's not just agitating, it's a combination of agitating, putting pressure from the outside, and having real solid fleshed out plans and ideas. So that's like the other piece I've been working on, right? So at the think
Yeah.
tank New Consensus, we have a very detailed plan for what do you do on day one to actually build an economy that works for everyone. We've been calling it the mission for America. And that's important because something I noticed in Congress is Democrats largely, by and far, they see their main job as fundraising, right? They don't see their main
Yeah.
job as being policy wonks trying to actually figure out what to do. And I
Mhm.
think that's a problem. I think right now we are in a stage where we need real solutions to these very big
Yeah.
problems we have. So yeah, you need all of it. You need a movement on the outside, you need people on the inside with courage, and you actually need the plans and ideas of what to do.
Do you worry at all that your answer there is in any way contradictory to our own admission together that what voters are looking for is radical change, though?
I'm talking about doing radical change, but what do you mean?
Well, it's that I think that the sort of timbre of democratic politics for the last like 10 years, right? For most people, it's like, oh, well, they'll put it in committee, they'll talk about it, they'll come up with
Yeah,
these plans, and maybe we'll get a watered down version of it, right? It's like I look at people like Zoran Mamdani winning, right? And it's like that guy won, it seems to me, because he called out the problem and he said, freeze rent, right? That's just what it is. And of
yeah.
course, there are a lot of expectations that are placed on him, and he's a mayor, and it's different than being a congressperson. Obviously, I know the dynamics are different, but I guess that if we're both saying that people are looking for radical change now, it's like how do you square that circle in making it clear to them that like this is what radical change looks like, so as to not disappoint them?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so when I say plans, I don't want plans to seem like I'm saying some weird wonky reforms. Like
Okay,
one
okay.
plan, for example, we were talking about is the way to tackle the fossil fuel industry right now is we nationalize them and transition the workers into things like offshore drilling.
Mhm.
That's radical, right? No one's talking
That's
about
yeah, very,
nationalizing the fossil fuel
very. Yeah,
industry.
yeah.
But what I mean by plans, we actually have to execute. And so Zoran, similarly, his campaign was universal childcare, freeze the rent, fast and free buses. But there are white papers on there of exactly how are we going to do universal childcare? Exactly how
Yes,
are we
yeah.
going to freeze the rent? Because that how does matter when you're in power. So that's what I'm saying is I don't want to be a member of Congress who's just agitating but
Yeah.
not able to then accomplish things. So, but I agree with you that I think the route to doing this is going in and pushing for the big stuff and actually try not giving up, like just going
Mhm.
all the way there, fighting against the establishment. And I'm going in that way. And I'm already calling for primaries against everybody. I'm calling for
Yeah,
primaries
yeah.
against Hakeem Jeffries. I'm not going to be going in there to like have a long career working up the seniority ladder and the oversight committee. That's not my path,
Mm,
right? I'm
yeah,
going in there to change this stuff because I think we're in an existential moment where if we can't, should we get power in 2028, if we can actually deliver and if we cannot deliver an economy that works for everybody, then the pendulum's
yeah,
going to swing back to the authoritarian right, and it's going to be worse. It's going to be worse. So I
yeah,
don't look at this as a long career at all. I want to get this stuff
yeah.
done
Now,
immediately.
now I have a follow up to that, right? Which is like, obviously, the person you were previously going to primary was Nancy Pelosi, right? Like Big Nancy,
Yeah,
and she said, "I'm retiring," right? But her acolytes, the people who are careerists, right? The people who do want to be there for 10, 20, 30 years, they're still there. And
yeah.
so if you're over here and you're like, I want to be a maverick who's effective, who's getting stuff over the finish line, right? Pushing my colleagues to join me in radical change. Well, then my question is like, how, to your point about, you need a how there. Well, how do you chip away at the vestiges of her form of governance that are viewed by so many people as ineffective or even
Yeah.
emblematic of a corrupt Democratic Party? How do you do that?
You replace them. That's the short answer.
Sure.
Yeah, look, I'm not. If it's just me that goes in there and I'm all by myself, I still think I can get some stuff done, right? Like I
Mm,
will fight to get like, especially on anti-corruption issues, there's bipartisan support. I'll get a congressional stock trading ban done. I'm not going to let go until that happens, right? I'm going to get things like a ban on the revolving door between lobbying and Congress done, right? But at the end of the day, the economic issues, the core economic issues, we have to have a whole new movement of people running for Congress. And I'm talking like hundreds of people. This was the original vision
yeah.
of Justice Democrats. I just think we were too early. I think the appetite for change I see right now, it completely dwarfs what I saw in 2018, which is why I think it's possible now to do it. And it's necessary. We actually have to do it. So yeah, so to your point, how am I gonna convince the current establishment to go along with this kind of politics? I'm not. I have to replace them. That's the only answer.
Yes, yes. One thing that I'm curious about, and it's something that I've been speaking about with like all the people who I'm interviewing that are running for Congress, is why go to Congress? And the reason I ask that seriously is because I think that a lot of people right now are seeing on social media and in mainstream news too, like the most effective, vocal, virulent resistance against Trump's regime right now is coming at the local level. It's like activists, it's DAs, it's mayors, it's some state representatives, it's some governors, right? And at the same time, what are they seeing from Congress, right? They're seeing Hakeem Jeffries go, "What are we going to do? It's the
Yeah,
government," right? And they're
yeah,
watching Chuck Schumer look down his long glasses and fold. And so I guess like what I want to know is why join what so many view as a sinking ship as opposed to
yeah.
staying local and exerting your power there?
I mean, that is my question for the people who want to just go in right now as career politicians. I honestly do not understand that at all. I'm like, why would you want to spend your time in DC getting jack shit done? Sorry, I know we're on TikTok.
Oh, it's
Why
all
would you want to
good.
spend your time in DC getting absolutely nothing done and just like working amongst this group of sociopaths, which I'm sorry, many of them are. But uh, but I think the reason I'm trying to apply for this job to go to Congress is a it has to change. Like I just think it's the big schlep. It's like the big problem that has to actually get fixed because so much of what we're doing locally, which is great stuff, is hamstrung if we can't fix the larger problem nationally. Just to take like one example, you look at our city budget in San Francisco, the largest driver of costs for employees are healthcare benefits. And so the answer for the city every year is just cut more and more services. And this is happening all across the country in every single city, right? There's all these city budget crises. We can't solve that at a San Francisco level. We can't even really solve it at a California level. Like we have
Mm,
to solve healthcare at a national level. Now, I just don't want to give up. I think if we decide we're just going to give up on Congress, give up on the federal problems, I think we're giving up on fixing these problems at all. I really do.
mm.
Now, I agree with you. I'd see Hakeem Jeffries going out there and being completely useless. That's why we have to replace him. That's why Chi Osei needs to run and actually win that
Yeah.
race, right? And part of what I am doing in this campaign is I'm not just talking about that. Like I am meeting all these folks who are running all around the country. I'm trying to recruit people to run around the country. It has to be a team of us that goes in there who are really committed to going all the way to fixing this stuff. Because if we can't get there, then what's the answer? I don't see the how of the other side. If we can't fix Congress, what do we do?
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of getting like the Legion, is what I'll call them in an informal way, right? Like this absolute, just this monstrous wave, to go in that direction. Obviously, one of the biggest barriers is cost, which is something that you are not necessarily so inhibited by. I know that you're self-funding your campaign, and that does provide independence. But of course, I know that it also highlights that personal wealth is like kind of becoming a prerequisite for running for office at a certain level. So I would like to give you the opportunity to say, like, how would you convince a like working class voter of yours in like Lakeshore that a self-funded potential politician like understands, let alone can solve the affordability crisis that they're facing every day?
Yeah. So I'll lay out one way this could work. Okay. Because this was kind of the idea initially with Justice Democrats, and which was initially called Brand New Congress. I have this theory that like the way the grassroots money machine works, which we sort of saw in Zoran's race, we saw it a bit on AOC's race that I ran, we saw it on Bernie's race, is it takes these two things. It takes some sort of movement or person running for office who is pitching real change, like pitching something that feels like if this happened, it's structurally, it's a shock to the system, it will actually fix the problem you're facing. And it has to have this other element, which is like if this person or this movement gets voted into power, they can actually do it, right? And I think that was what was so key about Zoran's race was he was running for mayor. So people know mayor has power. If a mayor gets elected, he can freeze the rent, right? He can actually
Mhm.
make the buses fast and free. So for Congress, I think the way you replicate that cycle is you need to have a large movement of people running. So I'm saying, a few hundred people running all across the country. And then could you run a race where that movement is what you're voting for, and therefore it unlocks that grassroots donation cycle that we saw someone like Bernie be able to unlock? Because I do agree with you, it's very difficult in a one by one race for an individual to make
Mhm.
the case that if you vote for me, you'll get universal health care. People know that that's not true, right?
Mhm.
But if you say, hey, I'm running with these 100 people who, if we all get in there, you are going to get universal health care. Now that's true, right? Now you got a chance.
Mhm.
So that's what I'd like to see. That's the kind of movement that I'd like to be able to spur. Like as you mentioned, yeah, in this race, part of my story I didn't mention is like, yeah, I worked in tech early and I ended up making a decent amount of money because of that. And that was actually like a radicalizing experience for me. It's a big reason why I ended up in progressive politics because
Mhm.
it's freaking crazy. Like, yeah, I worked hard, but I did not work harder than a teacher or a nurse or the people cleaning our offices did every day. And yet I have the choice now to like never work again while all the people actually running our society, actually doing hard work every single day, they're never going to be able to afford a home. They're never going to be able to
Yeah.
afford a secure retirement. And I actually think this is an existential problem for America. Like if we can't fix that fundamental thing, this country is doomed. And that's why I end up going to work for Bernie and calling for taxes on the rich. But all that to say is like, if I can, win this seat and then use this position as a way to lever that broader movement that do not want to lead, but I'd like to be a part of,
Mhm.
um, then can that movement collectively, raise the funds, raise the energy, raise the people to allow it to succeed for working people all across the country? I think that's possible.
Yes, you talk about movement building a lot in what I've seen from you, and I want to call out that a would-be opponent of yours, which is Scott Wiener. Fair or unfair, what he seems to want to point out preemptively is his record, right? Look at these tenant protections, right? That I had a hand in passing. So I want you to have the chance for any voters in your district who might be listening in, like say in your own words, what is the difference between what the both of you can offer for working class working class voters in your district?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say, my opponent Scott Wiener, his main focus in his 14 years in government has been housing, and during that time, housing prices in San Francisco have skyrocketed. Like I think he's been very good at passing an abundance of legislation, but not really on the actual outcomes in our city. But the other piece is, he's got experience in a largely Democratic Sacramento. He's got experience kind of like working his way up the ranks. He's going to be the same sort of politics. Like he's looking to go to DC to do the general seniority ladder type of thing. He doesn't have experience in Congress actually getting anything done. He's not going to be using the tactics that I was describing on the Green New Deal to push forward anything big and structural. And so it's a very different approach. Like he's going in there to like be another part of the current Democratic Party establishment, whereas I'm going there to wipe the Democratic Party establishment clean and change the direction of the party, right? So that we actually get this stuff done. But on the policies, I'd say we do have one specific issue where we are have a pretty strong difference of opinion, you know, and that's on the issue of foreign policy and specifically like the genocide that's been going on in Gaza, which I've been very critical of from the start. And I've been very clear. My position is if I'm elected to Congress, I will not be voting for any military funding to Israel. I'm not taking any money from any corporations or lobbyists right now, and that includes, the Israel lobby. Whereas Scott, he's always been an opponent of sort of pro-Palestinian rights movements in the Bay Area. He actually authored this bill in the California Senate called AB 715, which was a censorship bill. It equates sort of criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism in our K through 12 system. And one
Mhm.
result of that has actually been that in San Francisco, the one history textbook that we're allowed to use in the public schools just doesn't talk about Israel and Palestine because teachers are afraid of being disciplined as a result of that. And I just think that's bad. I'm for free
Yes.
speech. I'm against censorship.
Yes.
But it sort of gives you a sense of like where he will be on the issue federally.
Mhm.
And of course, he does not shy away from taking corporate and lobbyist money. He's trying to raise as much money from whoever he can.
Yes. One thing though that you and Scott Wiener do both support, from what I can tell, because you actually mentioned an abundance of bills or legislation. I don't know if that was a cheeky joke on your
It
end.
was a little
Okay.
bit.
Okay. But you both definitely support the abundance agenda that has obviously been, kind of a media cycled by its authors, Derek Thompson, Ezra Klein. But I know that as well that one of the primary critiques of the abundance agenda that is sort of being viewed as a springboard for the rest of the new Democrats, is what I would call them in 2028, is that people worry, progressives especially, really worry that it will just become a huge corporate giveaway in and of itself. And so when you look at the housing crisis in San Francisco, how do you want to ensure voters that this kind of agenda would actually lead to affordability for working families as opposed to just like higher margins for real estate developers?
Yeah. So I wouldn't necessarily say I support the abundance agenda. Like I've been kind of people have said I'm a yes and on it in the sense of the overall goal of abundance. Great. Yeah, I would, the Green New Deal was all about an abundance of
Mm,
energy, an abundance of, new industry that will actually provide high wage jobs. I'd say where Scott and I really differ on our take to abundance, and I see this fracture in abundance overall, is there's a version of abundance that is saying if we just tinkered with the reforms correctly, if we just got the exact right permitting environment and the exact right regulatory environment, and then the private markets could be unleashed and they would create this abundance for us. And I think that is fantasy. I think that is a big corporate giveaway, and it won't create abundance for anybody. I think if you actually look at the history of countries that have created abundance, and I'm talking about America during the New Deal and the World War II mobilization, but also every rich country in Europe today, all the rich Asian nations today, they all did it uh, through these periods. They all went through these phases where they massively upgraded and transformed their economies in the course of like 5 to 10 years.
mhm,
And when you look at how they did it, it was not the exact right permitting environment. They, in fact, used this whole other approach to governing that involved really setting the country on a mission. In America's case, in World War II, our mission was to win the war and defeat the Nazis. But in other cases, like in South Korea, it was just let's get rich as a country and lift people up from poverty. That was the mission. And usually it's a leader or a movement that comes in that really organizes civil society to be a part of that mission, convinces the public to join in, and uses that to create political capital to do more and more stuff. Countries in that mode, they create comprehensive plans. So they actually plan out what they want to do. They don't just pass some policies and then take their hands out the steering wheel and say, let's see what happens, right? And they have public financing and coordination and execution institutions. So America had a bunch of these all through our history. The largest by far was one called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, and that's actually one of the things we have a plan for a new consensus to bring back. But the RFC was it was kind of like a public bank and a project manager and like a public like venture capitalist all rolled in one. It was this agency that would go out into the economy, figure out what isn't getting built that we need to get built, and actually problem solve, fix the bottlenecks. If it needed to provide financing, it would do that. If it needed to spin off a state-owned corporation, it would do that. It would have use every tool possible to actually make sure stuff gets built. Now, to bring it back to housing in San Francisco, Scott's approach to housing is let's just do some deregulation, do some upzoning, and then the housing will show up. That's been his approach for 14 years, and that has not happened. It's just not happening. And I talked to developers during this campaign, both private developers and nonprofit developers, and they all tell me the same thing. Yeah, this upzoning stuff, great, sure. Let's upzone. No problem with that. But right now, the cost of materials is too high, inflation is too high, cost of money is too high because interest rates are high. None of this stuff's going to pencil out unless we can raise rents by like double. So is
Mhm.
that going to create affordable housing? No. So we actually need to be able to have public financing to finance the housing. We need to have the ability to create social housing. So the government actually going in and specifically developing the housing. So my approach to housing is let's plan it like infrastructure, like they do in countries like Finland or Singapore or in Austria
Mhm.
with Vienna, right? And let's actually plan out how much housing we need, like we do with the highway system or with the grid, and then have actual tools to make sure the housing gets built at an affordable level for people to be able to live in. It's a whole of society, like it's more government involvement, right? But if you're just
Mhm.
a neoliberal market driven YIMBY abundance person like Scott, you just kind of don't believe in that. And I'd say another difference between me and Scott is whenever it comes to taxes to fund this stuff, Scott will always shy away from taxing the rich. It's just always what happens. Like he's proposing, a sales tax right now to fund our transit, which is a regressive tax.
Mhm.
Whereas my view on it is we currently do actually have a lot of money in our society to be able to fund a lot of this stuff. It just happens to be in the hands of the top, 1 to 0.1%.
Yeah. In talking about rebuilding state capacity, right? One of the things that I think that anybody who likes to play inside baseball with DC politics will tell you is like, yeah, that's a nice idea, shortcut, but let's be real, the consultants, they're never going to let that happen, right?
Yeah.
The interest groups, like they'll never let this happen. This will get slow walked to death. And so knowing that you have so much vigor in your campaign towards just saying like, well, if you're not with it, then you're out. Well, then I want to ask again, like, how do you kind of dismantle the what I would deem the consultant industrial complex that has ruled Democratic Party politics for like what 40 years? Like to
Yeah.
actually see to that can get done.
I mean, it's the same answer that I have to how do you defeat or how do you get the establishment politicians on your side? You beat them. Like the Democratic consultant class, they have bad ideas. I'm sorry, and I've beat them in a bunch of races. They're not and I'm going to beat them again in this race.
Yeah,
The consultant class is against me on this one.
yeah,
They don't. They're a class that is constantly thinking about what's the messaging, what's the positioning, and how do we like win? How are we in these like little weeds on these little races? They're not capable of thinking at a larger scale of like what do we actually need to get done. And I just think the public at this point is at a place where they want to hear what do you want to actually get done. I think something that really helped Trump in the last election that the punditry class didn't talk about is he was kind of talking about these specific tangible economic tools like tariffs, and it paints a picture in people's minds. Of course, tariffs on their own is not going to rebuild manufacturing. That's never happened in the history of any country. But like people in America who are voting, they hear that and they hear tariffs as the symbol of Trump is talking about doing this thing that no one else is willing to say to fight for me to build back my job, right? Build back my means of making a
yeah.
living. And a consultant would have never come up with that for Trump. So yeah, I just don't pay much mind to the consultant class. I think they all like to think they have more power than they actually do. And I think the reality is you can create a political environment where that's the new environment within which all the ideas have to operate. And maybe there's a thing to actually talk about a little bit, but like part of like getting into like why I view things this way is like I really do think we've gone through these distinct political phases. Like if you look at sort of the era from FDR to Reagan, we're kind of in this New Deal world where even the Republicans had to govern like New Deal Republicans, right? And then after Reagan, we're in this neoliberal Reagan world where even Democrats like Clinton had to govern like Reagan style Democrats. And I'd
Mhm.
say ever since the Great Recession, voters keep saying, what's the new era? They did that with Obama. They did that with Trump. They're saying anybody who's pitching some new vision to change everything, will vote for you. And then you have to establish it. And that's the real battle in front of us is will this new era be the MAGA era, which is saying the way to get back to the American dream working is we kick out the immigrants, we shrink society, we kick out the marginalized, and then it'll work out for you, which isn't actually going to work. So after 4 years of trying that, voters are going to vote for change. So we have to pitch the new vision of how do we actually build an economy that works for everybody again, right? And so that's
Mhm.
and what I'd like us to the larger context of that is if we can establish that and make it work, then even the Republicans will have to govern in the confines of that political era.
Mhm. I think that one of the things that people would say currently is a very large barrier to building an economy that works for everybody, as something you pointed out earlier, is the concentration of wealth at the top. And
Yeah.
specifically now in this current era, I'd say the new era of society that we're living in, right, is the era of big tech, surveillance capitalism, um, just like techno feudalism. And I think that some people would like to hear from you, knowing that your background comes from tech in the more like I would say the more like utopian era of when big tech was viewed as like maybe the harbinger of progress and things to come. You know, I think people might want to hear from you about like how it is that you would square your relationships in Silicon Valley, knowing that like if you're going to go and fight for a wealth tax or fight for legislation that might be geared toward antitrust or breaking up big tech, like how exactly believable of a case can you make to voters here on this interview that like you will fight for them even knowing that like you ran in those circles for so long?
Yeah, well, I guess the way to make the case believable is that's what I've been fighting for 10 years, and I ran in those circles well before that. So if there's people who are burning their bridges with me because I'm calling for a wealth tax, those bridges have long been burned. But the larger piece here is when it comes to just talking about tech, right, and talking about the concentration of power in the hands of these big tech executives, there's sort of two parts of this. One is, yeah, I think tech itself is not good or bad. You can use tech for good or you can use tech for evil, right? And the big problem in my mind is currently we as a society don't make decisions on how to use any technology. Like if AI is coming down a pipeline, we just say, Sam Altman, you figure it out. Yeah, you're going to use AI for AI porn and slop feeds? Sure, go for it, right? If that's going to be the sum use of all your data centers. That's dumb. Like that's so ridiculous. Like why, if we're going to have this technology, why can't we use it to improve everybody's lives? Like that's the way we should be thinking. We should actually have the capacity to plan and decide that as a society. But when it comes to the power that's really been concentrated into the hands of, I really make a distinction here, the tech owners, right? It's really the CEO and VC class that have gone off and decided to align themselves with an authoritarian regime. They're paying these big donations to a ballroom and to an inauguration ball so they can suck Trump's ass and just like be close to him and not get penalized. And those people are just craven cowards. They are complete opportunists trying to line their pockets on their crypto holdings. And when I talk to tech workers in the city, most of them are embarrassed by it. Most tech workers do not want to be represented by Elon Musk or Peter Thiel or David Sachs. They actually want to be working on something, want to be working on tools that are used for the good of society if it can be that way. And so my appeal here is, yeah, I am absolutely with those tech workers, right? And I am always going to pitch them, and I'm going to try to give them an option of like, hey, you all could be working on this stuff, but for the good of society. But I have been very clear that people like Elon Musk are my opponent, and they are people I will absolutely take on, and I think they should be completely removed from power.
I thank you for that answer. I really appreciate it. And I also want to thank you again just for all the time you've given us today. But I want to close looking forward. Uh,
Yeah.
Imagine you win and you serve for, now you said you don't want to be a career politician, but I mean let's imagine you win and serve for a decade or something. I don't know. Now
Okay.
I want you to paint a picture, right? What is the tangible material difference in the life of a kid living in San Francisco with you as their representative in 2037 when you would take office versus what their life would look like today?
It's a really good question. I know 10 years doesn't seem like a long time, but I actually believe this, that at the end of 10 years, you could be a kid in San Francisco where your parents don't have to work two jobs or even really work more than 40 hours a week, and you will have high quality health care. You can just go to any doctor, any hospital. If you get sick, you'll be fine, right? You can go to your public school and know you're going to have a great education and that there's a future ahead of you where you'll be able to afford a home, you'll be able to raise a family, and you'll be able to live a stress free life where you're not worried about money every single day. You'll have time to pursue your hobbies. You'll have time to go pick up the guitar. You'll have time to go work on art. You'll have time to do what you actually want to do with your life. You, I think at the end of the day, it boils down to you can live in a society where, of course, there'll be challenges, but it's not a day to day struggle just to get by. And you know that if there are bigger challenges coming our way, maybe things like climate change or these larger societal challenges, we have a country that is set up to be able to handle that in a way that's best for you. And you can trust that. You can trust that, right? It's not on you to have to worry about what do I do about AI? What do I do about climate change? What do I do about all these big kind of existential problems that stress people out today? You know that your country has the capacity to watch out for your interests and to fight for you and to handle all that in a way that'll make your life better. That's what I think is absolutely possible to do at the end of 10 years. And I've seen countries do it way faster than that. So that's what I think is possible to do.
Saikat Chakrabarti, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you.